It takes a village to raise a child, and sometimes it takes a village to fail one. I have no personal connection to Relisha Rudd, but her face has stuck with me since I first read about her disappearance in 2014. Every case of a missing person is obviously tragic, but I think this one strikes a particular nerve because so many people could have helped Relisha over the years. When you look at her life, there were countless people who could have and should have seen that this little girl was in trouble. Because Relisha Rudd didn't live a happy life that she just disappeared from one day. She lived a life fraught with pain and uncertainty. She lived a life in which the adults in her world, at best, didn't protect her, and at worst, directly contributed to her disappearance when she was just 8 years old. When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell the stories of those who never came home. I want to tell you the story of Relisha Rudd. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Relisha Tanau Rudd was born on October 29, 2005 to Shamika Young and Irving Rudd. From the beginning, Relisha's life was not easy. Her parents, who also had a son together a year later, came from unstable backgrounds. According to the Charlie Project, Shamika grew up in the foster care system, and her father wasn't a part of her life, and her mother suffered from a drug addiction. Shamika, who was diagnosed with a mild mental disability, was a troubled child who spent time in a psychiatric residential treatment facility. While in her late teens, she met Irving Rudd, who was 16 years her senior and working as a custodian at Catholic Charities. The pair formed a relationship, and Relisha soon followed. While Relisha was Shamika's first child, she was not Irving's first. Back in 1991, Irving Rudd had also been a young father. His girlfriend had given birth to twins. 17 months later, one of them, a baby girl named Tarika, was rushed to a D.C. hospital. According to an article in the Washington Post for May 2014, Tarika was admitted with a split lip, a fractured skull, and bruises covering her tiny body.
Wow.
Yeah. Tarika did not survive her injuries. During the investigation into her death, in which Rudd was charged with first-degree murder, witnesses described horrific abuse toward Tarika at the hands of her father. When asked if he had ever assaulted her before, Irving told them, quote, "Not that one. We both was involved with spanking the other twin too hard and broke her leg," end quote.
Broken leg at 17 months old.
They barely have bones.
Yeah,
They're jelly. Like, how much force do you have to use?
That's nuts.
Yeah. When authorities went to Rudd's home to check on the other child, they found Tarika's twin sister suffering from similar injuries. She also only weighed 10 pounds. Now, just to put that in perspective for those of you who haven't looked at an infant growth chart recently, the World Health Organization says that the median weight of a 17-month-old girl is 22.1 pounds.
We know kids who are 10 pounds at birth.
Yeah, like newborns who are 10 pounds. Thank God ours weren't, my God. But still, 10 pounds.
Yeah, that's
At 17
crazy.
months old. And so what I find interesting is, so if this little girl had the broken leg, I mean, were red flags not raised then? Because presumably she had to have gone to the hospital. Did they just play it off? That part is confusing to me.
Yeah, you would think that a doctor would have reported them to CYS.
Or 10 pounds at 17 months old.
Right.
Like, I mean, that's going to raise red flags in and of itself.
It should.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, because that baby wasn't able to walk. I mean, a broken leg aside.
Yeah. But it makes you wonder if they're neglecting feeding her.
Well, I mean, yeah. How else do you...
You would imagine that they are they're not taking her to regular doctor's appointments either.
And that's true. And what's interesting is, as we get more into Relisha's childhood, not feeding, not following up with medical professionals is something that comes up in her life as well. Irving Rudd eventually confessed to causing Tarika's death, saying, quote, "Although I've killed her, it's not intentional, and I realize that I have done something wrong," end quote. Now, Rudd ended up being convicted of involuntary manslaughter, and he received a sentence of up to 15 years. He was released from prison in 2002, 3 years before Relisha was born. But since his release, he has had no further arrests. Irving and Shamika didn't stay together very long, and family members say that Irving was pretty much out of Relisha's life from the time she was a year old. Now, it's unclear if the problems Relisha experienced as a child started before or after her parents split up, because again, it's really interesting to me that the problems that Irving's older children ran into are very similar to the problems we're about to hear about in Relisha's life. But in the summer of 2007, social workers already had Relisha, who was not yet 2, on their radar. After conducting a home visit, they found evidence of inadequate food for her and her baby brother, along with indications that she had been physically abused.
So the pattern continues.
Right? But it's interesting because the family says that, by the time she's a year, Irving's gone. So you can't necessarily say he's to blame, but you can't say that he's not, because he doesn't just disappear. I mean, he's around.
You also have to think, parents develop their own parenting style together.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something that wore off on
Shamika. Well, and you got to think too, Shamika was so young as well.
Yeah.
I mean, she was a teenager when she met Irving. Irving's 16 years older.
Right. So she probably just went along with kind of whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever
and keep
he
in
said.
mind, Shamika also grew up in the foster care system.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure she had a troubled childhood and, didn't necessarily have examples of good parenting. Relisha and her brother did remain in the home, though, and soon Shamika entered into a new relationship with a man named Antonio Wheeler. Shamika and Antonio eventually had 2 sons together, so at this point, Relisha is the oldest of 4. She has 3 younger brothers.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Antonio moving in didn't mean that Relisha's life became more stable. In fact, things seemed to get worse. In 2010, social services returned to her home and found unsanitary living conditions. The home was covered in cigarette butts, and there was evidence that Relisha and her siblings, who were all under the age of 5 at the time, had been left alone often and allowed to bathe themselves. Social workers also cited medical neglect, as one of Relisha's brothers had reportedly undergone surgery but had not been followed up with by a doctor. Again, despite these findings, all of the children were permitted to remain in the home.
Typically, I would say, let's try to not blame the social worker. I know from experience that there's a bunch of hoops to jump through, and it's very difficult to as well it should be. It's very difficult to remove a child from a home. But I mean, at this point, this is the second visit.
Yes, the second visit since Relisha's been alive, and she's not even 5.
Right. And I'm sure there was some sort of services offered in the home, sure, but there's a pattern of behavior with this family, because that's the other thing, is this isn't the first time social services has been called on Relisha's mom. The history is there.
Yeah.
So they would have known that, Irving, with his experience in child abuse, trickling down through the family.
Well, but I'm wondering because, Irving's daughter's death happened in 1991 or 2, and so I'm wondering if the social workers even had access to that information.
Yeah.
Soon after, things began to deteriorate even more for the family, and they ended up losing their apartment. Shamika and her children were eventually forced to stay with Shamika's sister, Ashley Young. That arrangement didn't last long, however, as Ashley was on a government housing subsidy, which limited the number of people allowed into the home. So in the summer of 2013, with nowhere else to go, Shamika and her children moved into the DC General Family Shelter. And this is a building that I was unaware of prior to researching this case, but you are more familiar with DC than I am. The DC General Family Shelter was the second iteration of a large building that originally served as a hospital, which is why it's called DC General.
Yeah. I'm familiar with the building. I was more familiar with it as a hospital than a homeless shelter.
Yeah, it shut down completely in 2018, but at the time Shamika and her children were staying there, it was home to approximately 250 families, totaling 1,000 people, which I can't even wrap my mind around.
That's like a small city.
Yeah, I can't even imagine that many people living there.
In one building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Relisha reportedly hated living in the shelter, which by all accounts was very unpleasant. Melissa Young, Shamika's mother and Relisha's grandmother, told InsideEdition.com that Relisha, quote, called it a trap house. And, do you even know what that means?
No. And how old is she at this point?
She's 8.
She's 8?
Yeah.
Calling something a trap house? What does that mean?
I mean, it's something that she would learn from, music videos and stuff like that. YouTube.
Yeah, well, that explains why I don't know it.
Yeah, I know. Well, exactly. That's why I wanted to stop and see if you even knew what I was talking about. But from how people describe the shelter, it doesn't sound that she's that far off, because the shelter was plagued by reports of bed bugs, rotten food, sexual assault, drug deals, and more. And so the drug deals, like the sex, all of that that's why she would call it a trap house.
Gotcha.
Based on all of that, it makes sense that Shamika would try to get her kids out of that environment as much as possible.
Sure.
The problem is that when they moved in, it was summertime, so the kids didn't even have school as a refuge. And DC in the summer, woof. It is not, like cities in the summer are just not a pleasant place to be.
Yeah, and the humidity levels in DC in the summer are outrageous.
For those of you who don't live in the area, we live in a literal swamp.
Yes.
It's awful here, weather-wise. And so, they're either in the shelter with bed bugs and drug deals, or they're outside in terrible weather, concrete, blah. Even though Shamika's relationship with her sister Ashley was strained after Ashley told them they couldn't stay with her anymore, Ashley still helped out with the kids, having them over to her house frequently. But that's when things started to get a little strange. Ashley told InsideEdition.com, quote, "I would get the kids every week, but I wouldn't really get Relisha," end quote. When Ashley asked her sister why, Shamika told her, quote, "She was with her godfather," end quote. Now, that seems like a reasonable explanation, or it would, if it weren't for the fact that Relisha's godfather was Ashley's fiancé Melvin, and Relisha wasn't with him.
So where's Relisha going?
Well, that's what Ashley wanted to know. But, Ashley thought it was weird, but at the end of the day, Shamika was Relisha's mother, and it was up to her who her daughter spent her time with. So Ashley didn't feel as though she could really question it too much. She just felt like it wasn't her place. But things just kept on getting weirder. One day, when Relisha actually was over at her aunt's house, Ashley received a strange phone call. It was a man that Ashley had never spoken to before, who said he would be over soon to pick Relisha up. Now, obviously alarm bells just started ringing in Ashley's head, and she asked the man, quote, "How did you get my number? How did you get my address? How do you know where I live?" End quote.
Yeah, this is...
Right? How creepy is that?
That is the creepiest phone call you could ever receive.
Just some unidentified man saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to come pick up your 8-year-old niece, be by in 5.
Yeah.
After hanging up, Ashley immediately called her sister to find out what was going on, but Shamika wasn't worried. She told Ashley that the man who called was Relisha's godfather, and that it was totally fine if he picked her up. Ashley didn't know it at the time, but the man on the other end of that phone call was Khalil Tatum. Khalil Tatum was not a name Ashley had heard before, but he would be responsible for Relisha's story going down the darkest path. Hey guys, have you heard about Anchor Podcasts? It is the easiest way to start your own podcast. In fact, it is how I created this one. So let me tell you about it. Number one, most important, it is free. You can also use creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. They'll even distribute your podcast for you. So they'll make sure that you get onto Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and all these other amazing podcast platforms so that you can find listeners. You can also make money from your podcast. They have built-in monetization tools, and there's no minimum listenership required. It is everything you need to make a podcast all in one place, and I can't recommend it highly enough. If you want to get started, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm today. Tatum was a 50-year-old custodian at the DC General Family Shelter.
50.
He had befriended Shamika and had taken a special interest in Relisha. He began spending more and more time with the girl, taking her shopping and sightseeing in DC. Eventually, Relisha started spending the weekends with Tatum.
What?
Yeah.
At his house?
Presumably, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And mom is just going along with this, it seems like?
Yeah. It seems like it. And so we'll get to this. I mean, because the family member stories have just changed over the years. And she, at one point, Shamika, denied ever letting Relisha hang out with Tatum. But basically, everybody else involved says that that's not true, that she very much let Tatum and Relisha go off together.
And the younger kids, are they boys? Are they girls?
Yeah, they're boys. So Relisha has three
Relisha-
younger brothers.
Okay, so Relisha is the only female of the family.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Melissa Young, Relisha's grandmother, told InsideEdition.com that she was initially wary of the man's interest in her granddaughter, but eventually warmed up to him, saying, quote, "I have spent time over at DC General when I spent time with my daughter and her kids. I've seen him when he was getting off work and have had little short conversations with him and felt very comfortable. I trusted him. I felt comfortable with him. And I don't trust everybody," end quote.
I mean, sure, you can trust somebody from having a couple of conversations or whatever with them, but trust them enough to have your granddaughter spend the weekend with essentially a stranger, a 50-year-old stranger?
Yeah.
That's not family? That's
Yeah. Yeah. Melissa justified Shamika's decision to allow Relisha to spend time with Tatum as her way to get Relisha out of the toxic environment at the shelter. Yet, Tatum never invited Relisha's brothers to stay over or go shopping with him.
Exactly.
Yeah. Despite the young family feeling comfortable with Relisha spending more and more time alone with a 50-year-old man, there were problems with the situation besides the obvious. DC Family General Shelter had a strict policy in place against employees fraternizing with guests.
Rightfully so.
Yes. At least it was a strict policy on paper. Like many stated policies, this one wasn't exactly enforced. In the investigation that followed Relisha's disappearance, it was revealed that several staff members at DC General were aware of Tatum's relationship with Relisha and failed to report it. It was also policy that nightly bed checks were performed to ensure that all of the residents were on site. Yet records show that all of Young's children were accounted for less than 50% of the time.
We've got Children Youth Services missing or dropping the ball.
Mm-hmm.
We now have two instances where this shelter also dropped the ball and didn't report things.
Right, by not, yeah, exactly. They're not following their own policy. But what I find fascinating about the bed checks is that, so it's policy that everybody is there at night, and they kept records of them not
when
doing
they weren't
it.
There, yeah.
But didn't actually do anything about them not being there.
Yeah.
But beyond that, if Shamika's only goal was to have her daughter stay in a safe place outside of the shelter, which I get, that part of it, yes, get out of the shelter, it doesn't sound great. But why would she have Tatum pick Relisha up from her own aunt's house?
Where she was already safe.
Yes, Relisha was with family. What sense does it make to have a non-family member pick Relisha up while leaving her siblings behind?
It doesn't make any sense.
We don't know the answers to those questions. All we do know is that Relisha started spending more and more time with Tatum. On February 26, 2014, around 7:30 p.m., security cameras caught Tatum and Relisha heading toward a room at the Holiday Inn Express in Bladensburg Road in Northeast D.C.
Going to a hotel now.
Yeah.
And is there anybody else on the
on the security
footage? Camera?
No, it's just the two of them.
Oh
yeah.
My God.
Relisha's wearing pink boots, dark pants, and a blue winter coat. She's carrying a white plastic bag full of what could possibly be takeout food. Tatum is dressed in khaki pants, a dark winter coat, and what appears to be a lanyard with an ID badge. He is also carrying a children's backpack. And both Relisha and Tatum appear to be at ease. So we'll have this security footage on our website so people can take a look at it. But what's striking about it is how ordinary it looks. If you were just another guest at the hotel and you were passing by these two people, you would not give them a second look.
Right, yeah, sure.
Because, I mean, they could very easily be family. They both seem, like I said, they both seemed relaxed. They're carrying food in a backpack and they're, wearing winter clothes. There's nothing strange about the situation at all, at face value. Now, Relisha's whereabouts after this day are a little unclear. but she is confirmed to have been seen alive after her trip to the Holiday Inn Express with Tatum. Her last confirmed sighting was on March 1st, 2014, so 4 days after this. According to an article on WJLA.com, Shamika Young's Instagram account has a video dated March 1st that shows Relisha with her siblings. A family member confirmed that this video was taken during the first week of March after the kids got new shoes. But that wasn't the only confirmed sighting of Relisha on March 1st. She was also seen yet again with, you guessed it, Khalil Tatum. They were spotted on security footage going into another D.C. area hotel room, this time a Days Inn.
Another hotel?
Yeah. Not even the same hotel, which for some reason makes it maybe creepier. I don't know if that makes it creepier or not, but I don't like it.
Yeah, there's nothing to like about this
yes,
situation.
Of course.
So.
And so this is also the point where my suspension of disbelief runs out. If you want to give the biggest benefit of the doubt in the history of the world and assume Khalil Tatum was a generous older man who saw a lot of children in precarious situations through his job at the homeless shelter and wanted to help out, you first need to dismiss the fact that it was only little girls that he helped. Mm-hmm. And then you also have to do the mental gymnastics to find a logical, coherent reason why, despite the fact that he lives in the area, he would take an 8-year-old girl to several different local budget hotels.
Yeah, none of this makes sense. I mean, unless you can't ignore the fact that he's trying to hide this from his family.
Yeah, I mean, presumably. Who knows?
That's true.
Well, there was one legitimate reason given for these hotel visits. Shamika's boyfriend and the father of 2 of Relisha's younger brothers, Antonio Wheeler, told the Steve Wilkos show that he was under the impression that Relisha was at a pool party for Tatum's granddaughter. And look, to an extent, sure, that makes sense. If you live in a place where you don't have access to a pool, a motel is an inexpensive way to have a pool party. And we've done this before, too. I mean, I'd had a full-on pool party, but we have also stayed at hotels literally 5 minutes from our house.
It's an easy vacation.
Yeah. Like, because, if it's winter time or whatever, which this is February, it's if they've got an indoor pool, our kids love swimming, so it's just a great way to go spend time and do something different with them.
But would you spend an entire weekend there?
Well, yeah. I mean, if the story is it's a pool party, I mean, okay, that's one day at the Holiday Inn Express, sure. But then why was she at the Days Inn on March 1st?
Right.
How many granddaughters does this guy have? So the first hotel trip was February 26th. The second hotel trip was March 1st. And by the way, I say that they're the first and second hotel trips. We have no clue how many hotel trips there were.
Right. These are just the ones that we know of,
yeah,
because they were captured on surveillance footage.
Right. Well, and cops knew to look for them because what happens is after March 1st, Relisha is unaccounted for nearly 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Mm-hmm.
And mom didn't report her missing during those 3 weeks?
Yeah, no. And we'll get to that, but before we get into what happened between Relisha's last confirmed sighting on March 1st and when authorities got involved on March 19th, 3 years after her disappearance, so we're going to fast forward a little bit to 2017, Shamika, her ex-boyfriend Antonio, and Shamika's mother Melissa all went on the Steve Wilkos show. And on this show, they accused each other of causing Relisha's disappearance. So basically during it, and we'll have these clips on the website too, basically during it, Shamika says that her mom gave Relisha to Tatum. Antonio is like, I don't know who did it, but it wasn't me.
What is the Steve Wilkos
So the
show?
Steve Wilkos show, if you're not familiar, is, all right, you remember the Jerry Springer show, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Steve Wilkos is a former Marine and police officer who got his start in television as a member of the security team on the Jerry Springer show. Yeah.
Right.
So he substituted as host for Springer several times before getting his own show. So if you've never seen the Steve Wilkos show, but you know about Jerry Springer, like you kind of get an idea of how this went down. But yeah, I can't do it justice, so we're just going to play a short little clip from the episode.
But I ain't do nothing.
You know what? She's right. Please stop. You don't have to take a test, but you're not eliminating yourself as a suspect in the disappearance of your daughter.
Let me tell you something. Okay. I talk to the police day to day, and they don't never discuss me. They discuss other people.
I was the police, and I investigated murders, crimes against...
I don't want to sound judgmental of people who have been through a horrible tragedy, because I truly do ascribe to the belief of you don't know how you're going to react in a situation until you're in it. You know, you always see stories when something terrible happens, they're like, oh, she cried too much, or she didn't cry enough, or blah, blah, blah. But I am having a hard time wrapping my mind around this whole show situation 3 years after Relisha disappears.
Yeah, I mean, what's even the point?
Yeah, well, so they took, it's the hallmark of trash TV, they all took lie detector tests.
Okay.
So both Antonio and Melissa were asked if they had anything to do with Relisha's disappearance. Both answered no, and both were found by the Steve Wilkos show. I don't know. So take it how you want, but they were found to be telling the truth. Now, when I just said they all took lie detector tests, that isn't actually accurate because Shamika didn't. And there's a whole part of the clip where she talks about how she doesn't need to because police cleared her, which they did. Shamika has never been charged with any crime. At one point, there was a talk about charging her with obstruction of justice because her story kept on changing and she was not being very cooperative.
But don't you think that that's suspicious in and of itself?
Well, of course it is.
I mean, here your child is missing and the story that you're telling the cops is changing.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me raises a whole lot of red flags.
Yeah, and for anybody listening to this, I really, really encourage you to go to our website and watch the 2 clips, because there is the clip of the whole like lie detector test part, but before that, Shamika does a package in which she talks about basically kind of what happened and, you know, her feelings about losing Relisha. And some of her statements do not match up with what has been reported. So back to March of 2014. Relisha's last confirmed sighting is on March 1st, both on Shamika's Instagram and on video surveillance at the Days Inn with Khalil Tatum. On March 2nd, Tatum is seen via video purchasing a carton of black 42-gallon contractor bags in D.C.
Yikes.
Then, between March 2nd and March 20th, Tatum is seen many times at work and other places, but Relisha is never with him. So that's the other thing. All right, let's rewind back to the bed checks. Bed checks every single night. Relisha is not in her bed from March 2nd to March 20th.
For 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And again,
like that's a long time.
Nobody reports it.
Yeah, it's one thing if she's missing a night here or there, whatever. But we're talking 3 weeks in a row. This girl's 8 years old.
Right.
So weeks go by, and nobody seems to notice Relisha's gone, including her family. Then, on March 13th, a school counselor at Payne Elementary, where Relisha was a student, writes a referral to the D.C. Child and Family Services Agency and basically says, oh, hey, by the way, this kid's missed a ton of school. In fact, by that time, Relisha had missed 30 days of school.
30 days.
30. Now, if that seems like a lot, you're correct, because after 10 absences, the school is required to notify social services within 2 days. But the school didn't do that because they were giving Shamika leniency to get paperwork together to excuse Relisha's absences.
What paperwork?
Oh, that is a very reasonable question. We don't exactly know the answer to that, but we do know that Shamika had previously written notes to the school excusing Relisha's absences, claiming she was sick and under the care of a Dr. Tatum.
Are you kidding me?
I wish.
And this, none of this is on official letterhead or anything like that.
I can't imagine. Yeah,
this is just a handwritten note from
I think it was just
mom.
it was a regular like, oh hey, you know, Relisha's sick. Don't worry, Dr. Tatum's taking care of her. I don't think it was an actual doctor's note or anything like that. I mean, it obviously wasn't an actual doctor's note, but I don't think they were forging doctor's notes or anything that high
Right,
tech.
but you have to imagine that the school would want something formal.
You would
with
think
that
after,
many absences.
with that many absences, and the school should want something formal. And my guess is that's the paperwork that they were letting Shamika get together before they reported her to social services. Because they probably said, like, hey, Relisha still isn't, showing up. What's going on? And she says, oh, yeah, I'll get a real doctor's note from Dr. Tatum, but obviously couldn't.
Sure, but for how long? How long does that go on? I mean,
don't know.
You're talking about 30 absences?
30, yeah. So if they're supposed, let's say they actually, did their job and they said after 10 that, hey, there's a problem, and they realized that, then they let 20 more happen?
Exactly. Yeah, like this...
Or they let 30 happen. Like, it's either way, it doesn't look good for the school.
It's another failure.
On March 19th, a social worker calls Dr. Tatum to arrange a meeting, and he agrees to meet her at the shelter, but he never shows. So at this point, the social worker seems to be getting the idea that this guy isn't actually a doctor.
I mean... meeting a doctor at a homeless shelter?
I don't know.
That
well,
wasn't
maybe
a big enough red flag?
Maybe he's the doctor who makes house calls, and that's where he had to take care of Relisha. I'm just trying to figure out what was going through any of these people's heads. They also find that while Khalil Tatum did work on March 19th, he checked out early. According to a timeline published by the Washington Post, social services called Tatum and his phone went straight to voicemail. A missing persons investigation is launched 18 days after Relisha's last confirmed sighting. So again, March 19th is when Relisha is officially declared a missing person. And
who initiated the missing persons
investigation? The social worker.
The social worker.
Yeah.
Not mom.
No. So, yeah, they don't know she's gone. No one in Relisha's family reported her missing because, according to them, they thought she was under Tatum's care. Relisha's grandmother, Melissa, says that she was actually heading to pick Relisha up when she was greeted by police. She told InsideEdition.com, quote, "The police said to me, 'Did you know your granddaughter's missing?' I'm like, 'No, she's not missing. She's with Khalil Tatum. I spoke with her twice. Me and Ashley just talked to her that morning," end quote.
Now, was that ever confirmed by anybody?
Not that I've seen. So police have always used March 1st as the last confirmed sighting of Relisha. They've never said, oh yeah, she was seen on March 1st, but like people talked to her much later. None of that has ever been confirmed by police. And I feel like that would be relatively easy to confirm in 2014 with phone records. So yeah, I have no idea about that one. And keep in mind, one of the concerning parts of this story is that on March 2nd, the day after the last time Relisha was found, Khalil Tatum was caught on camera buying 42-gallon black trash bags.
Yeah, what are you doing with
I mean, maybe yard work. I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yard work. He definitely doesn't need them for his job. All of that stuff would have been provided by the shelter.
Yeah. So whether Relisha's family spoke with her or not, they still placed her in Tatum's care, wrote bogus sick notes to get her out of school, and did not see her in person for nearly 3 weeks. And as dark and confusing as this case is already, things are about to get much worse. That night, shortly after police start searching for Relisha, Khalil Tatum checks into the Red Roof Inn in Oxon Hill, Maryland, with 4 other people, including his wife, Andrea. And when I started to read about this, I was shocked that he had a wife because, this whole time I'm reading about this creepy 50-year-old janitor who is spending the weekend with an 8-year-old, and I'm thinking like he's some weird hermit who lives in a dirty apartment somewhere. But he has been married at this point for like 26 years or something.
And how does his wife not know anything about him spending all of this time with an 8-year-old girl?
We don't know that she didn't know. I mean, she very well could have. We have no idea.
And do they have any kids?
Yeah, they do. Because remember, the pool party was for his granddaughter?
Right.
The alleged pool party? When they checked into the hotel, Relisha was not with their group. It was Khalil, his wife Andrea, and then 3 other adults. Then, less than an hour later, 3 members of the group left, leaving Tatum and his wife behind. The next morning, shortly before 6 a.m., one of the friends returned to pick Tatum up. When he went to the motel room, he says he saw Andrea lying face down on the bed, but Tatum wouldn't let him come in. They left, and the man drove Tatum to the Southern Avenue metro station and dropped him off. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why his friend came to pick him up. When Relisha was reported missing on March 19th in the evening, they put out a bolo for 2 cars that Cleo Tatum is known to have driven, and him. So pictures of his car and pictures of him are out on the news at this point. So it would stand to reason that he didn't want to be seen driving his cars, which is why he asked his friend to come back and pick him up.
Okay.
But somebody did see Tatum's car in the Red Roof Inn parking lot and called it in. So just over 2 hours after Tatum left the hotel, at 8:01 a.m. on March 20th, police entered the room at the Red Roof Inn and found Andrea Tatum dead, shot once in the head.
So do you think at this point, the fact that this is out on the news potentially could have sparked some questions from his wife as to why he was wanted by the police or whatever, and maybe that led to him shooting her?
Yeah, I mean, it very well could have.
Maybe his wife was actually completely in the dark about this.
I would love to know what his wife knew and what his wife didn't know. I mean, because it's just so unclear. But at this point, once police find Andrea dead in the hotel room, Tatum is charged with murder and a manhunt begins. At this point, police believe that Tatum is responsible for Relisha's disappearance because, I mean, why not?
Yeah.
What they don't know is whether she's dead or if Tatum has gone on the run with her. By the time Andrea's body was found, D.C. police had already issued an Amber Alert for Relisha, and like I said, they had released the photos of the 2 cars that Tatum was known to drive. D.C. Police Chief Kathy Lanier told reporters that the city was doing everything they could to find Relisha, saying, quote, "Our Amber Alert went through systems as far north as Pennsylvania and as far south as Florida. This certainly seems like a good move since police were so far behind the 8 ball when it came to finding Relisha. Except that statement doesn't exactly appear to be true." So the Amber Alert was issued in D.C. and residents received cell phone notifications. There were signs on the freeway and notifications in local media. So everything that goes along with an Amber Alert.
Right.
Everybody in D.C. got it. But according to an article on WJLA.com, quote, "The state law enforcement agencies responsible for issuing Amber Alerts in Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida all tell ABC7 News that there were no requests from D.C. to issue an Amber Alert."
Wow. So she just, straight up lied about that.
It appears so, yeah. Maryland State Police issued 2 critical missing alerts, so they were aware of the situation, but they could not issue an Amber Alert unless MPD requested it. Maryland State Police spokesperson Greg Shipley told WJLA, quote, "We just did not receive the request to issue the Amber Alert," end quote. That statement was echoed by officials in West Virginia, South Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Eventually, Georgia issued its own Amber Alert, but while D.C. police certainly sent out notifications to other state law enforcement agencies regarding Relisha's disappearance, Chief Lanier's claim of an East Coast Amber Alert is simply untrue. Days passed without any sightings of either Relisha or Tatum. On March 24th, the FBI released additional photos of both Relisha and Khalil Tatum. The next day, on March 25th, they offer a $25,000 reward for Relisha's return. Prince George's County Police offer a separate $25,000 reward for information leading to Tatum's arrest. And that's because the murder of his wife took place in PG County.
Right, so he's a murder suspect as well.
Throughout this time, tips are coming in and police are investigating Tatum further. They find that Relisha wasn't the only little girl he had contact with at the shelter acting against policy. Though he offered these girls gifts and money, often in view of other staff members, he was never reported.
And another failure.
Right. And, so we have talked, we have talked before about how he had relationships with these other little girls, but I've never read anything about whether or not they would spend the weekends with him like Relisha did.
This is showing, potential grooming behavior.
I don't think it's potential. Well, I think it's...
This is showing grooming behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, widespread. for multiple girls. So we just don't know what level it went to with these other girls. And frankly, we don't know what level it actually went to with Relisha. We just know that they went to hotels together. As days go by with no sign of either Tatum or Relisha, police say they cannot rule out the possibility that Tatum murdered the little girl. In fact, another body was about to be found, but it wasn't Relisha's. On March 31st, a body is discovered in Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Garden in D.C. On April 1st, 1 month to the day after Relisha is last seen alive, the body is officially identified as her suspected abductor, Khalil Tatum. The cause of death was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Following the gruesome discovery, police searched the 700-acre park for any sign of Relisha, but came up empty-handed.
700 acres is a big area, but it's not
an insurmountable area, especially when it's
right.
a park. It's not just the woods somewhere.
Right, yeah.
Now, 6 years later, no sign of Relisha has ever been found. Authorities believe she is no longer alive, and searches have centered around finding a body. In December 2015, authorities searched a large construction site in northeast D.C., but turned up nothing. On April 6, 2016, police announced that they would be using divers to search around the National Arboretum. In December of 2018, after receiving a tip, police searched a network of tunnels beneath the shelter where Relisha and her family stayed, but found no sign of the missing girl.
How many years after she was missing?
Yeah, 4.
That's when they decided to search the tunnels?
Yeah, I read that. I'm like, what on earth is happening?
Why wouldn't they have done that initially?
I have no idea. You know, when you have a place that Relisha had access to, that Tatum had access to, that they both could go to and not seem out of place, that seems to me like a natural spot to start looking. Well, okay, the park was the natural spot to start looking, but that should have been maybe number 2 on the list.
Right, and all of it.
All of it.
Yeah, the entire building.
The more time that goes by without a body being found leads more and more people to think that Relisha could possibly be alive and a victim of a sex trafficking ring, with some even accusing Shamika of giving Relisha to Tatum for exactly that purpose. Sex trafficking is a $99 billion a year industry in the United States, and Tatum's grooming behaviors and frequent trips with Relisha to area motels would fit with a sex trafficking theory, but there has never been any evidence that Relisha's mother had any knowledge of potential sex trafficking related to Tatum and her daughter. For his part, Shamika's ex-boyfriend believes Relisha is still out there. He told WUSA 9, quote, "I actually believe she's still alive. They just keep looking for a body, and every time they look for a body, you find nothing, so what did that tell you?" End quote. He continued, "I pray to God that she's alive because I don't know what I'd do if she'd come up any other way but alive." End quote. Relisha's family was forever shattered when she disappeared. Various family members pointed fingers at the shelter and at each other, with Shamika, Antonio, and Melissa all going on the Steve Wilkos show and accusing one another of contributing to Relisha's disappearance. The day Relisha went missing, her siblings were removed from Shamika's care. Relisha's father, Irving Rudd, who had previously tried to get full custody of his children in 2012, tried again after Relisha's disappearance. His request was denied by a judge who cited Rudd's conviction for involuntary manslaughter.
Against his own child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Today, none of Shamika Young's children are with any of their family members. According to that InsideEdition.com article, Shamika's eldest son has been adopted by another family. Her middle son is having a hard time being placed in a local home, and her youngest is with a foster family in another state. The 3 boys lost each other along with their oldest sister, nicknamed Lil Mama, because she loved taking care of them.
I do find that interesting that the 3 of them got split up.
Yeah.
That's contrary to what you're supposed to do as a social worker or any kind of family court or anything like that. You always strive to keep the existing family, the siblings, together.
Heartbreaking, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, these poor kids lost everybody.
Yeah.
Every single person that they knew. The story of Relisha's disappearance is really a story about systemic breakdowns. you go back to the beginning of her life and you have the social workers who got involved but ultimately didn't do anything. You have the homeless shelter who didn't follow their own policies. You
Multiple
have
times.
multiple times. You have the elementary school that didn't follow the policy about calling social services.
After 10 days and let it
Right.
go on for 30 days.
Yeah, and then you have Police Chief Lanier saying that she did an East Coast Amber Alert when she didn't.
Right.
If any of these had gone differently, I mean, her entire life could have gone differently.
Yeah, she might not be missing.
There are obviously a lot of investigations after Relisha's disappearance, not just related to her disappearance, but, through the schools and the shelters and social services, and nothing really ever came of them. The school released some sort of statement that was like, oh yeah, we investigated ourselves and found that we did nothing wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
Internal investigations are
Exactly.
Pointless.
Like, it was just, nobody wanted to take responsibility for this little girl at all, at any point. So now the DC General Homeless Shelter no longer exists. It closed completely in 2018, and the idea was basically to decentralize it and open up several smaller homeless shelters throughout the city, which does sound like a good idea based on what was reported to be going on. Again, you have 1,000 people in this one building. I don't think it's that crazy that there were drug deals and, bed bugs and things like that going on. So the idea to make smaller shelters is a good one. The problem is DC never followed through on this. They closed DC General, but then failed to open the other shelters.
Right. And as far as I know, there's only one homeless shelter in DC right now. And if you drive around DC, you just see tent cities everywhere.
Yeah.
There are so many displaced families, displaced people that just have nowhere to go.
Right. So there are still so many displaced families. There are still so many people who are potentially in similar situations but have somehow even less protection than Relisha potentially did. In February of 2020, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released an updated age progression photo showing what Relisha may look like as a 14-year-old. The day I started writing this episode happened to be July 11th, Relisha Rudd Awareness Day in Washington, D.C. Since 2014, efforts have been focusing on closing the systemic loopholes that led to her disappearance and possible death, hopefully preventing, as they say, another Relisha. Relisha Tanau Rudd has been missing since March 1st, 2014. She would be 14 today. If you have any information on her whereabouts or her disappearance, please contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or your local FBI office. If you'd like to help immediately, you can sign a Change.org petition to raise the reward in this case from $25,000 to $75,000. The link to sign will be posted on our Facebook page and on our webpage. You can see all of the sources for this episode in our show notes and on our website, andthentheyweregone.com.
And be sure to follow us on social, And Then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook, and at ATTWG Pod on Instagram and Twitter. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It will help new listeners find us.
We'll see you here next week for a brand new episode.
See you next week.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. All research, writing, and editing is done by Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Engel. And Then They Were Gone is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!